Good morning, everyone. Happy Friday morning to you, and welcome back to Morning Musings. My name is Don K. Preston. I am the president of Preterist Research Institute. This is video number 12 in our response and refutation of Sam Frost's book, The Parousia of the Son of Man. Now, like I said, this is video number 12. My plan is to do no more than 20 videos, even though, look, if I were to respond to every error in this book, this series would be 100 videos long. Virtually every paragraph is full of presuppositional, a priori argumentation for which Mr. Frost gives no proof whatsoever. He assumes certain things to be true without proving those things. He just makes his conclusions. Well, as the old saying goes, if you grant a man his presupposition, then he can prove anything, literally. Well, what I've been sharing with you in the previous 11 videos is the exposure of just some of Mr. Frost's presuppositions for which he has no proof whatsoever, and as a matter of fact, which are absolute, direct, overt, explicit contradictions of passages of Scripture. Now, before we get into today's video, I got to tell you, I'm just really, really excited. On August the 2nd, 9:30 Central Time, 10:30 Eastern, obviously, I will begin, finally, my introduction on the Now TV network. This will be a 30-minute weekly television program, and the name of it will be, shock and disbelief, Morning Musings. And so, it will be on YouTube, by the way. The Now TV network is considered one of the fastest growing cable TV shows or programs, networks, if you please, in America. And I'm just absolutely super, super excited. Now, William Bell is already on air. You want to make sure to watch, just go on YouTube. Look for William Bell on the Now TV network, and you'll see William's videos there. This opportunity presented itself. There are some people I want to publicly thank for helping us to get some of the technical equipment that we needed. And by the way, I'm having a little bit of trouble with my mic cable. It seems to be going bad. I'm in the process. I'm going to get a new cable today, Lord willing, and get that straightened out. Some of you are getting left side, some getting right side. So I think it's my cable. Hope it's not my mic. But all of that aside, like I said, I'm just absolutely thrilled to death with the opportunity to be on the Now TV network, 30-minute TV show every Friday, 9:30 Central Time. Be sure to watch for that. Be sure to tell all of your friends. And look, this is just another example of how the message of covenant eschatology is spreading and spreading and spreading. People want to hear this message. It's exciting. So I hope you'll join me. Okay. What I want to do in today's video, and I've already talked for 5 minutes here, what I want to do in today's video is just do a really, really, really quick, obviously, overview of Mr. Frost's views of the Olivet Discourse. Now, since I'm doing an extensive study on the Olivet Discourse, I hope that you will take the time to view those videos that I have already produced, because you will find the evidence, you'll find the exegesis, not mere claims, you'll find the exegesis of the Scripture. And if you have Mr. Frost's books, you will find the refutation of his claims in those videos. With that said, I want you to see that Mr. Frost's claims concerning the Olivet Discourse, in the first place, they're absolutely remarkable. And what I mean by that is Mr. Frost is constantly telling us his views are historical, his views are creedal. Well, I want to tell you something. You will not find Mr. Frost's view of the Olivet Discourse in any of the patristics. If it's there, I've never seen it, I've never heard of it, I've never read it. Here is what Mr. Frost tells us. When Jesus predicted the fall of Jerusalem, the disciples immediately thought of the end of the age. Now, for Mr. Frost, the end of the age is, quote, the annihilation of the world, unquote. See our video from last week. So, the disciples think about, supposedly, the annihilation of the world when Jesus predicts the destruction of the temple. Folks, the temple has nothing to do, had nothing to do with the annihilation of the world. See, this is one of Mr. Frost's presuppositions, his a priori arguments for which he gives no proof. He just hopes that his readers, well, annihilation of the world. Well, of course. That's not the way exegesis works. But the disciples said, tell us, when shall these things be? Now, as I pointed out last week, Mr. Frost is absolutely, completely, and totally wrong when he said these things don't refer just to the temple and to the city. They refer to the destruction of the cosmos. Well, point number one, Jesus hasn't mentioned a word about the destruction of the cosmos. Point number two, in Mark chapter 13, the parallel passage, they begin to show Jesus the buildings of the temple, and Jesus said, do you see these things, these buildings? That's what he's talking about. So Mr. Frost steps completely outside the bounds of the language itself and inserts a doctrine into the text that's not mentioned in the text. That's eisegesis. Okay, so the disciples asked about, when shall these things be? What shall be the son of your parousia? Now, you've got to pay attention here, okay? You'd never get this out of the text. Mr. Frost has to insert it into the text. For Mr. Frost, the parousia is Jesus' ascension into heaven. Now, are the disciples asking Jesus, tell us, when will you ascend back to the Father? They don't believe yet that he's leaving. Every time he's mentioned his death, they've said, not so, Lord. No, 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 no. Matthew 21. They do not have a concept of Jesus' ascension. And yet, according to Mr. Frost, we're supposed to believe they're asking about his ascension. That doesn't work. Then, again, pay attention, please. Then, what we have is the disciples are asking about, number one, the fall of Jerusalem, the destruction of the temple. Number two, they're asking about Jesus' ascension, which was fulfilled in Acts chapter 1. I wonder why they would have to have a sign of his ascension. Why would they need a sign? They were with him when it happened. Why do they need a sign for this? Nonetheless, they ask about a sign of his ascension to the right hand. Folks, they didn't need a sign of that. To reiterate, Peter affirmed it in Acts chapter 2, that Christ had been raised from the dead, seated at the right hand. They didn't need a sign of it. But Jesus had shed forth the miracles that day, which proved that that is where he was. You want a sign? There it is in Acts chapter 2. To continue, Frost then says they ask about a sign, not only of his coming, i.e. his ascension, but of the end of the age, i.e. the supposed annihilation of the world. So we're supposed to believe that they are asking about an entire panoramic view of human history. And then, thus, Jesus, and by the way, I hope you'll go back and watch the videos on the birth pangs of Messiah. I hope you'll watch the videos in which I talk about the coming of Elijah, and Mr. Frost in his book agrees that John the Baptizer was Elijah, a fatal, absolutely fatal admission. So, here is Mr. Frost's outline of the Olivet Discourse. This is where I've got to hurry. in Matthew chapter 24, 9 and following, Jesus says, you will hear of wars, rumors of wars. There shall be earthquakes, famines, pestilence. But the end is not yet. And Mr. Frost says, the wars, the rumors of wars, this seems to be what he's saying. He's a little vague on this. But what he seems to be saying is, you're going to hear about the fall of Jerusalem. That's the wars and the rumors of wars. But it also has to do with the entirety of the current Christian age. Okay? So wars and rumors of wars are just a natural part of the world that we live in. They're just a natural part of the age in which we are living. But they include the fall of Jerusalem. So the disciples are just going to hear about the fall of Jerusalem, and they're supposed to know that it really honestly means nothing. It's not a sign of the end. Strange, is it not? The disciples thought that the fall of Jerusalem and the temple was linked to the end of the age. And Mr. Frost initially said, well, no, it didn't have anything to do with the end of the age. And then he changed his position on it and said, well, yes, the disciples did think of the annihilation of the world in relation to, in connection to the destruction of the temple. No, they didn't think any such thing. Okay, so we have the wars, rumors of wars. Then we have the preaching of the gospel into all of the world. And Mr. Frost denies that the gospel was preached into all of the world in the first century. Now, for my July 2019 two-book special, The Element Shall Melt with Fervent Heat, and Into All the World, Then Comes the End, I document how Jesus used given words to both predict, Matthew chapter 24, 14, and to command the preaching of the gospel into all of the world, oikumene, into all of the world, Greek word cosmos, to all of the earth, Greek word gi, Acts chapter 1, 6 and following, to every creature, Mark 16, 15 and 16. And Paul used, and to all the nations, by the way, Greek word ethnoi, and Paul used every single one of those words to say the gospel had been preached into all the world. And oh, by the way, he also said the end was near. And yet Mr. Frost denies the reality of Paul's words, denies that Paul meant what he said, and said the gospel has not yet been preached into all of the world. So at some future point, according to Mr. Frost, the gospel would be preached in all the world, then comes the end. Oh, but we're not done. Number 3, Mr. Frost says the gospel has to be preached into all the world, that we're in the current age in which we're living. Oh, but then Jesus said, when you, speaking to his living, breathing apostles, when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet, let the one who reads understand, then let those in Judea flee. For then when? At the time of the abomination of desolation. Now watch this, listen very carefully. Mr. Frost says that you and I, right now, today, living in the New Covenant age, in the Christian age, we are living in the time of the Great Tribulation. Okay, where is the abomination of desolation? I mean, after all, Jesus said, when you see the abomination of desolation, number 1, flee Jerusalem. Folks, you and I don't live in Jerusalem. Do we? Mr. Frost doesn't, lives in Indiana. The abomination of desolation was obviously something to take place in the land of Israel, witnessed by those in the land of Israel to flee from the land of Israel. Oh, but wait, the Great Tribulation, according to Mr. Frost, cannot be related to that because you and I don't live in the land of Israel. We don't flee from the land of Israel, and yet it is because of the appearance of the abomination of desolation that the Great Tribulation would continue from that point until the so-called annihilation of the universe. So I want to know, what was the abomination of desolation? Where would it appear? And how are we supposed to flee from it if we are in the Great Tribulation? Now watch this. Final point. I've got to hurry. Mr. Frost says that Matthew chapter 24, 29, and 30 through 31 are really talking about seeing Jesus enthroned at the right hand of the Majesty on high. Notice it has nothing to do with, seemingly so, the, quote, end of the age. No, not for Mr. Frost. Then, immediately after the tribulation, that would mean after the end of the current age, after the preaching of the gospel into all of the world, immediately after the tribulation of those days, they will see the sign of the Son of Man in the heavens. Now, Mr. Frost is correct in one point, and that is that the events that they were going to see would be the sign that Jesus is enthroned as King of Kings and Lord of Lords. Oh, but wait. And they will see the Son of Man coming, Greek word erkomai, on the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. Wait a minute. Mr. Frost says in those events, they would realize that Jesus had come in fulfillment of Daniel chapter 7, 13, and 14. Look, folks, go to my website and look up my debate with William Vincent on whether or not Daniel 7, 13, and 14 is a reference to the ascension or whether it's a reference to Jesus coming in judgment as depicted in Matthew chapter 24. So here we have Mr. Frost saying, after the tribulation, which is the entire span of the current age, the entire span of the current New Covenant age, then they will realize that Christ ascended to the right hand. Folks, that's not what the text says. Then they will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. It does not say, there's not a syllable in the Greek that would suggest, then they will see that the Son of Man had come. Nor is there a syllable in the language that would justify saying, well, in those events you'll realize the Son of Man came and that he continues to come on the clouds of heaven as the gospel is preached. Now wait a minute, this is after the preaching of the gospel into all the world to bring in the end. Lastly, Jesus said, verily I say unto you, this generation will by no means pass until all of these things. All of what things? His coming on the clouds of heaven with power and great glory, to send out his angels to gather the elect, the abomination of, the abomination of desolation and the great tribulation, as well as the preaching of the gospel into all of the world. Jesus said, verily I say to you, that was his apostles sitting there with him on the Mount of Olives, this generation will not pass until all, not some of it, not a little bit of it, not most of it, until all of these things come to pass. And Mr. Frost tells us, well, they haven't come to pass. And he plays complete word games, abusing the term, this generation. Hey, look, I'm out of time. I told you I could stretch this out a long, long time. This is literally a thumbnail sketch of Mr. Frost's views of the Olivet Discourse. There is not a syllable in Matthew chapter 24 that supports his claim. Let me recommend, once again, that you go to my website, donkpreston.com, bibleprophecy.com, and order the book, Into All the World Then Comes the End, and the Elements Shall Melt with Fervent Heat. Regular price on these two books would be over $40. For July 2019, this does not apply to overseas orders. Total cost delivered to your door is $30. So there's a banner there at the top of both websites. Just go up there, click it, walk you right through it. Save yourself $10. Hey, look, thanks so much for joining me for this morning's morning musings. You have a fantastic weekend, and please be safe. Hope to see you on Monday.